Today, we don't want to take anything home. Okay, so I'd like to introduce our program for this evening entitled The Greatest and Earliest Built Barns of the Oley Valley and the Mysterious Warding Away of Evil Marks, Hex Signs, and Symbols, presented by Mr. Greg Huber. Mr. Huber is a house and barn enthusiast, independent scholar, and principal owner of Past Perspectives and Eastern Barn Consultants based in Macungie, PA. Since 1975, Mr. Huber has been involved in pre-Civil War house and barn architecture and is a co-author of 2 books. His #1 best-selling book is called The Historic Barns of Southeast Pennsylvania, Architecture and Preservation Built 1750 to 1900. So let's welcome Mr. Huber as our speaker tonight.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm really overwhelmed. I gave a talk on the barns, believe it or not, last Saturday, like 3 days ago, and I got 9 people. That's true. No, that's not exactly right. I got 10 people, including the person who introduced me. So does that count? I'm not sure. Anyway, thanks everyone for coming out here tonight. I think I spoke here in 2012, 2011, 2012. Does anybody remember that talk that I gave? A few people? 1? That's it? 2? Oh, there, my gosh. Just a couple things. I have a sign-up newsletter, a sign-up sheet for a newsletter, my Barn News and Events newsletter. You can sign up for that. There's no charge, at least now, tonight, maybe tomorrow. But anyway, we have that, and several of you signed up, maybe 15 of you already. Books are for sale. I have 4 up there, so you can see me, I guess, after the class. And we're going to get started. The Oley Valley, boy. I'm not a native of Pennsylvania. I think that's good, though, as far as the light's concerned.
That good?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think that's perfect. And, okay, we have that. Everything is A-okay. So I'm from northern New Jersey, and I moved here to Pennsylvania in the Macungie area in 2000, May of 2000. So I've been here for 21 and a half years. I don't want to lose those few months. And it's really been incredible what I've been able to do, the people I've met, the barns there, they're all over the place compared to northern Jersey, that's for sure. I did a barn survey of Lehigh County where I live, and there was 47 or 46 days that I spent. Some of them were full days, some of them were partial days, and I counted 1,675, just about 1,675 barns. That was in Lehigh County. I think there's probably at least twice that many in Berks County. It has to be. So that means you probably have upwards of 3,000, 3,200, 3,400, something on that. So the barns are really still here, although not that many early ones. So the Oley Valley is really special. I mean, I haven't been in every barn for sure, but there's a number of barns that are really great. Vicki, you couldn't be left out. How many barn tours have we had now? 6. 6, yes. We had 2 in late September, 2 in May sometime, and we've had others. So anyway, that's a fun thing. And our next tour is going to be a bus tour, okay? Not a follow me in the car tour. So we'll be able to stick a lot more people into the bus than a few cars. Where do you really begin with the Oley Valley? I think the greatest, as far as the barn world is concerned, in southeast Pennsylvania, the 2 areas that are the greatest is the Oley Valley, I had to say that, right? And also Lancaster County. Lancaster County has some phenomenal barns. You have a great diversity of barns here. I don't know where, the other part of the show, of course, is with hex signs and various marking systems. And I have 2 surprises for you tonight. Not even Tom Stokes know what they are. At least he better not. But we have those donated temporarily for tonight from a barn owner in the Oley Valley. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. Barns of Oley Valley and the hex signs of Oley Valley. Let's get started. Am I advancing this thing? Hello? This on the right? Okay, gotcha. I'm going to be reading some of these slides. It's not always the best thing to do, but I don't always have everything memorized. I mean, I may not have the information at my fingertips. But in any event, today what barns will we see? We'll see a few of the earliest remaining barns in all of Pennsylvania. And they were erected in the late 18th century, and then some of the earlier ones and later built ones in the valley. Most barns in Pennsylvania differ significantly. The ones that we mostly see are from about 1820 to 1880, and they differ very, very significantly from the barns built from 1710 or so to 1770 or 80. Things evolve. Anything with the human world, anything in the universe evolves, and barns are no different. Now I wanted to show you these slides of Bethlehem. Okay, the Moravians, of course, were great, great record keepers. And they recorded everything. They recorded the Yankees beating the Red Sox in 1770. No, that didn't happen. All right, fine. Anyway, they really did a lot of recording of things. There's the Moravian Archives, of course, in their archive building, believe it or not. This is a view of. I have a pretty good voice. I can project pretty well. I can't see it really well over here. But in any event, this is it looks like a Gemeinde house. No, that's the Gemeinde house on the docent right there. And here, this is the real earliest areas of the Bethlehem. This was probably painted or sketched or what have you about 1750 or perhaps 1760. I'm not sure exactly when, but this gives you a little bit of flavor of what things basically look like, or certainly at least generally look like 250, 275 years ago. We have very, very, very few views of that, but this is one of them. Now let me go back. This is the Crown Inn, okay? The Crown Inn was just south of the Lehigh River in Bethlehem. Okay, this is, somewhere around here. It's not really important. The Lehigh River is here, and the Monocacy Creek came down here, and that's why the Moravians settled where they did, okay? Here we have the earliest illustration of a barn anywhere in Pennsylvania. So the Crown Inn was just south of the Lehigh River. Here's the house, there's the hay barrack, and there's the barn. I came here and I saw that first in about maybe 2002 or 3 or 4, something like that. That wasn't a cell phone, was it? Please, no cell phones. In any event, that is the earliest illustration or image of a barn in Pennsylvania. If I didn't know that that was illustrated in the 1750s, I would say that there's a good chance that it was around that time, maybe from 1740 or so to 1770 or 1780. And the reason for that is the steep roof. Look at how steep a roof that is. This is a ground barn as opposed to a 4-bay barn or a 2-level bank barn. And that's what makes that so special for that time frame. We probably did not have the German 4-bay barn by the 1740s, but probably into the 1750s and almost certainly into the 1760s. And that's the barn that you see so often on the landscape, well, a later one called the Standard Barn, which we will see. And here's a close-up, of that barn right here. Here is the hay barrack, the 4-posted movable roof structure, an outbuilding, but there's the barn. Probably a log structure in all likelihood. We had all kinds of log structures in virtually every county in southeast Pennsylvania, east of the Susquehanna River and south of the Blue Mountain. But now we have hardly anything as far as ground barns, 1-level ground barns are concerned. Here is another shot of whether it was the same artist or not. It's much more clear. Here we can clearly see the Lehigh River and the Monocacy Creek coming down. Here are the main buildings in the earliest settlement area. And this is just another scene of Bethlehem to give you a sense of that again. This is apparently a frame ground barn. There's an illustration of that in the book. We have 3 bays. We have a wagon bay. So your loaded hay wagons would come in to the barn, settle into this area, and the farm crops would be thrown on either side. And we can see an end wall elevation. There's nothing that illustrates a basement area of this barn. Okay, so we know almost unquestionably that this is a very early, probable 18th century illustration of a frame ground barn, not a log, not a stone. So that's what makes it so unusual. And here we have a bunch of German dialect terms and words. Now, anybody recognize that tree? Anybody? Yeah. Several of you should. Yeah, many of you should. That's a sacred oak, taken, I think, in 2009. All right, it hadn't been culled. All the dead wood, all the dead branches hadn't been culled out yet. This is a chinkapin oak, or a yellow oak, and it is not very, very common at all. Where they got seeds for the chinkapin oak, unless it was that different, back 250 to 350 years ago, there were Indian meetings there, and a commemoration kind of thing, and a promotion for its health in 2007, I think, and I attended the one in 2009. But without trees, you're not going to have any barns. That's the deal. That's the way it goes. And here is one of the great roots, a massive root on the one side of the tree with all the lichen growing on the side there. This is, now come on, behave yourself. Okay. This is not in the Berks County, Oley Valley area, but it is in Montgomery County. This is probably about 30 miles away, maybe possibly 40 miles. Maybe not quite that much. This is a stone ground barn, a 1-level ground barn. And on the other side, come on. Okay. On the other side, this is the wagon door, of course. On the other side, the other eave wall is a lintel above the door opening. And it has a carved date. You can't see it now, but one of the fellows who had been studying German culture forever told me it was dated 1761. So this is a really, really one of the finest and oldest barns, essentially intact from its earliest times. And the interesting thing about this barn, and you'll see it, is that the stone does not ascend to the peak. It only ascends to the eaves level. I know of 3 other barns that are like that. Why they did that at such an early date. So many of the Schweitzers, which we'll see a few examples of, went stone to the peak. But here, they didn't do it that way, for whatever reason. And here we have the Stapleton barn. Is the Ruth family here? No. Okay. In any event, this was probably built in the 1780 era. It's a wonderful ground barn. Stone to the peak again. Stone to the peak, not to the eave level. It's supposed to be Bob Ensmayer, whose name, a lot of you probably know his name. He called it a variant English Lake District barn. I choose to call it a variant ground barn. The far side, where the cows were, is about 4 to 4.5 feet below the level of the wagon floor. You don't see that in other barns in Pennsylvania at all. But here it is. You have the splayed loopholes, and they were not to take aim at marauding Indians at all. I'm sorry to disappoint you. This is one of the rare barns in the state that has a red tile roof, but not on the regular roof area, on this pent roof right here that protects the door that leads into the stable. But for some reason, it's right there. It probably is not original, although these red tiles last almost forever. This is a much later edition, probably 1860, 1870, something like that. But this is a prize-winning barn. It has all of its original roof trusses, and you'll see illustrations of that in a little bit. This is the other far side of the barn, the one that we didn't see before. And here we have 1, 2, 3. Supposedly, this is the rule. When you have a ground barn and you have 3 door openings in the basement level or the lower level on the end wall, that makes it a Lancashire style Lancashire half basement style ground barn. There you go. And there are a few of these left. There's maybe 3 or 4 of them, one of which is in Montgomery County. And here we have the inside of the barn. This is a really rare, spectacular kind of structural arrangement. This beam right here is in effect a swing beam. Anybody ever hear of a swing beam before? Well, they're all over the place in west central New Jersey. They're in many areas in the Schoharie River Valley and the Mohawk River Valley in New York State. And they're all over the place in Ontario, north of Toronto. Okay, so this is where horses or oxen, but more likely horses, were tethered to some kind of a contraption that allowed them to go around in a circle and create or do, in effect, threshing, separating the seed from the chaff. So this is a 4-foot overhang right here. These are joists or ceiling beams in the one stable area. They cantilever over this beam right here, and it opens that wagon bay up another 4 feet. It's one of the earliest ground swing beam barns that we know in North America. So that ain't common. Now we get into the barn that is, well, it just has a fascinating history. It's a romantic, as far as I'm concerned, it's a romantic history. This is the Schweitzer. And it's a two-level bank barn, okay, with a 4-bay at the front. So this is all original, okay, again with the splayed loopholes. We have a very steep roof. It was built in 1784. There's a date stone on the far side, not on this side, but on the other side. It's in Oley Township, and it's set off quite a distance from the main road. And this is about 4 feet, maybe four and a half feet wide. So it's the addition. It's not an addition, but it's part of it's an integral part of the barn. This makes the diagnostic feature of the Schweitzers. You have a longer front roof slope and a shorter rear slope. That's what helps define the Schweitzer barn. How early did Schweitzer barns come into the Oley Valley or even Berks County? We can't be certain. There's all kinds of Schweitzer barns in the western third of Berks County, and they get fewer and fewer in incidence coming east. And by the time you get out to the Delaware River in Northampton County, you hardly have any at all. And that's because they spread out, as best as I can tell, from Lancaster County. Here is another shot on that one end wall that has the date way up here. And you can see how short that 4-bay is. Some of them are much, well, maybe close to twice that width. So they're up to maybe 7 to 8 feet wide or something like that. Stable wall doors, a staircase that leads into the 4-bay, and an end wall door. This is on the inside of the barn. Now here we have much more of a real view of a swing beam. Here we don't have all those cantilevered beams and all that. It stretches. This particular one is made of tulip wood or tulip poplar, okay, and it's about 14 inches in thickness, and it stretches from the stone wall. This is the 4-bay area over here, and it stretches from the stone inner wall all the way to the back wall. And again, it allows animals, a farm animal of whatever kind, to trot a circular path to do the separation of the seed from the chaff. And here we have another Schweitzer. Now this is probably built somewhere in this 1830 to 1850 time frame. The other barn was a 3-bay barn, the Reifschneider barn. This one is a 2-bay barn. So here we have, here we have a wagon bay. The wagon doors, it opens, of course, into the barn. And here's the end bay, or the mow, where the farm crops were stored. A fairly steep roof, but it's framed. And here again, we have the longer front roof slope because the presence of that 4-bay, or appendage, in the front. This has some wonderful marks. This is on one of our barn tours, what was it, 2 years ago, not, or maybe it was last year, I guess it was last year. Well, the Nab family went crazy. How many barns have we found now? 8 or 9? Something like that. We found date stones of about 8 or 9 Nab family people in the Oley Valley. This is one of them. This is one of the earliest ones, actually, 1829. The other ones, as you'll see, are later than that. This is just some beautiful carving on the stone here. And here we have another Nab barn, built 1846. Now this is a standard barn. A standard barn is a 4-bay, 2-level bank barn, but it does not have that extra added appendage in the front. And because of that, these barns, the standard barns, have a symmetrical roof line. A symmetrical roof line. And that symmetrical roof line that typifies the standard barn is the most common barn in the Oley Valley by far. Here's another one of 1851. And this is a rare square stone smokehouse. Isn't that crazy? But there it is. Uh-oh. I just wanted to show you, this is in northern Bucks County. And this is a double log crib ground barn. And it's 3-bay, wagon bay, the log crib, and in about the 1830 to 1850 time frame or so, the roof, because the barn was really so small, and this is the time during the Industrial Revolution that the barn roof had to be raised to increase crop storage capacity. And we have that there. But these are rare. There were thousands and thousands of them in southeast Pennsylvania. And now I think on my list of even pure double log crib ground barns or partial ones, there's only 24. Only 24. And several of those have disappeared. But this is what you would have typically found in the Oley Valley and beyond. Okay. This is probably built around 1790. One part of my Lehigh Valley barn survey that I did is out of the close to 1,700 barns, how many barns would you guess? I'll have a couple of volunteers, just 2 people maybe. How many barns do you think might have been from the 18th century? Definite ones. You just look at it and you just know that it had was from that age of pre-1800. Anybody want to volunteer? Please? Come on.
5%.
How many?
5%.
5%. Okay, anybody else? You, sir. You don't have any idea? Okay. This is how many barns of the definite 18th century barns that I found. 1, yes. That's in Upper Milford. It's an unquestionable 18th century structure. There's probably about 5 or 6 barns in Lehigh County that date just around 1800, but they're not real definite pre-1800. That's the kind of attrition that has occurred in barns, in the barn population in that one county. So we have a tremendous misrepresentation of what's actually been on the landscape for the last 250 years and even more. Okay, this is a German roof truss, okay? And this is, these smaller rafters are common rafters. This is the very distinctive German-based early style Liegender Dachstuhl, okay? And this is more narrow or narrower at the bottom, only about 6 inches wide, and it's about 11 to 13 inches at the top in the various houses, mills, barns. And the reason for that is because, and it only goes up about halfway up the roof. We have a purlin plate here. It's got to be received somewhere, and so it's widened. Pardon me. I'm going to need some water. Please, thank you. So on each roof slope we have one of these large timbers, oh boy. And we have what's called a straining beam, and then a collar beam, thank you, and a end brace. Okay, that is the very distinctive roof structure. It's the earliest German-style roof structure that we're aware of. So the earliest one that we know of is the Hans Her House in Lancaster County. That's 1719, but that's actually a variant one. There has been so far, I think, 52 or 53 barns found with this type of roof structure. The Stapleton barn that I told you about before, the one that was built in the 1780s probably, has that roof structure. The Reif-Schneider barn had that. The Nab barn had that too. Here we have a different type of roof structure. We have an English-based structure where you have that big timber that goes all the way from the wall plate on the lower part, the lower right, all the way up to the roof peak. And these have been far, far more plentiful than the Liegenderstuhl. These are later structures incorporated into these barns. I found just over 250 of these in various barns of all kinds. English-based barns, German, earlier barns, later barns. This is a barn in Raresburg, and it's a double log crib Schweitzer, probably built around 1800, I would say. But as the words up there say, these barns were normally included in barns from about 1790 to 1830. But then they just became very labor intensive, and they wanted to, earn a living. They wanted to earn their money, just like we do today. And it just went out. It went out after about 1830, maybe into the 1840s. Although the Saucon Creek area in Northampton County has them up until at least the 1850s for some odd, unknowable reason. This is the Bertoldt Schweitzer, and another one of the great, great barns in not just east of the Mississippi, east of the Susquehanna River, but anywhere in the state. It was interesting for about 5 or 6 years, so it seemed. Every time I went into this barn, there would be a new feature that I hadn't seen before. This barn, as a Schweitzer, except for 1 or 2 barns in Franklin County, which is just remarkable, this barn has more original features in it than any barn that I've ever seen. It's in Oley Township. This again has a swing beam, like the other barn that we saw before. This wagon door is a har-hung door. There it is, har-hung door, where you have a vertical beam. It's a pivot beam on the non-attachment side of the door. And this goes back many, many hundreds of years, way back in Europe, and possibly even Roman times. Don't quote me on that though, but that could be the case. I think there's only been 6 or 7 of these har-hung doors found. And here we have one in the Oley Valley. No, we actually have 2 in the Oley Valley. We have one at the Kaufman Homestead, which many of you know of, on Kaufman Road. But that's a much later barn. That's probably about 1850. That's a barn that we visited on one of our tours. And here, there's a guy in New England, and I told him about this Stickbalken, or this timber that appears at the bottom of a common rafter. And this is a wall plate. Okay, so this is about 2 feet long. You have an iron bar here that secures the Stickbalken. With this, he had never heard of such a thing in North America. I told him about this maybe, who knows, 10, 12, 14 years ago, but he was rather flabbergasted about it. And that's what the Bertoldt barn has. Just as an example, why did they do this in this barn and none of the other barns that I know of in southeast Pennsylvania? No idea. Here is a Hexelkammer. This is the area where you have an original staircase going from in front of the stable wall and leading up into the forebay. And on that other side is this Hexelkammer, or a place where you would store straw, apparently, and maybe other things. I'm not sure, but all these boards here are original and made secured with wrought nails. And this is another feature. It has the original trap door there It's crazy with original features. It is truly a museum barn. Here's the original staircase. It's the earliest one that I know of anywhere in Pennsylvania. Sorry. This is a spriggle bar right here. This is a stable wall door frame, okay? This is probably an original door, and this is a wooden bar, probably around 3 inches by 3 inches or so, and it retracted into the door jamb over here, and at night, apparently, it was pulled out, and it connected to the other side, and that kept the horses in at night. But there could be other interpretations of that bar. In any event, that's the earliest one that we know of in Pennsylvania. Just another one of those amazing things about the barn. And I've left off a number of the things. I think one of the original doors from the cabin from 1735 still exists. One of the door halves still exists. This is an 1805 barn. You can see the date right there. This is a pediment. It's a end wall basement door hood. This barn has one of the earliest architectural recesses that we know of. Now that's going to be an exciting thing for all you people, something that I've never done at a talk before. Here we have, again, well, it's a standard barn now. Standard barn meaning symmetrical roof line. And you can't see the roof line. I apologize, but that's what it is. Here we have louvered windows. All right. Here we go into the interior of the barn, and what do we have? An amazing structure, an amazing structure. Look at this. A king post. Maybe a few of you have heard of queen posts. They go on, that emanate from the tie off to the side. This is a king post that emanates from the swing beam. Again, another swing beam in this barn. And it proceeds or ascends from here all the way up to the roof. And ends in the top of a principal rafter. Here we have the upper, this is the upper tie. This is very unusual for a king post not to emanate or begin at an upper tie, but from a lower on down beam, a swing beam, by about 5 or 6 feet or something like that. This is a gem of a barn too. This is in the Oley Valley. And this is the top of the king post. King posts all over the place in England and Europe, including England. There's a number of early log ground barns in the Quebec area of Canada that have these king posts. And here we can see the connector at the top, the principal rafter, and here we can see these iron plates that secures the whole thing. These indents here into the wood are called joggles. Okay, what are we doing? Did I miss something? No. Okay, we have the next barn. Boy, was this a big barn. We visited this 2 years ago, I believe. I think it was 122, 125 feet long. And boy, oh boy, it had a carved-in date in the plaster in the rear wall of 1824, I believe. It went on and on and on. Here we are approaching the barn in the back. This is a very, very, very rare orientation or placement of a granary. 99% of the time, maybe not quite that high, 98, 99% of the time, the granaries were placed on the front of the barn. It was drier there, you had some kind of air circulation to some degree below the forebay. Okay, this barn has a transverse granary. It's 5 bays. The barn was so huge that the barn builder, in concert with probably the barn owner, had to think, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to place the granary? Well, they had to do it a different way. Okay, in this barn we had mow, wagon bay, mow, wagon bay, mow. And so they alternated here. So it made the most sense. If you go into the barn and just kind of hang around and just stand there or sit there or something, this makes all the sense in the world that they would have this granary that goes from side to side or transversely. And oh yes, this is an interesting thing too. This wall that separates the granary on the other side of this wall and the mound, I think that's how it went, have nails that secure the boards to the studs in back of it. But they alternate between wrought nails and cut nails. Why that is, I haven't figured that quite out yet. Here you see another rather dramatic view of that. Very rare. Here's the inside of the barn, of the end wall, with all these louvered windows there. Probably not original. I would very much doubt it, but you can see the arrangement of 1/3/4/4. Some of the splayed loopholes have arrangements of 6 rows. Rarely do they get over 4, but I think I've seen like 1 or 2 5-rowed with 5 rows, and one I think is 6-row. Here is the Bieber Barn. I've met Effie. Anybody know Effie Bieber? Yeah, a few of you. This is an 1809 barn. Mill. Stone to the peak. Again, here's the hood, and you have the 3, pardon me, typical doors for each level. This was so rare, and I don't know where it is now, of course, but the original miller's desk was in this wonderful mill. Here's the 1809 date at the top or in the middle of the pediment. This is just a view of one of the barns. I never got into it. We passed it. It's a long stone to peak standard barn with 3 barn stars on the front wall. That's one of them. But look at them. Look at this barn star a little carefully. You see really a 5-point star on top of another 5-point star. You don't always see that, so it makes for a 10-point star, obviously. This is one of the gems. It's maybe very small. It is small, but that doesn't mean that it's not important. Here we have this Basket Road. Oley Road? Okay. Don't remember all the roads. In any event, this is a small standard barn. Here's another addition over here, and look what we have. A log section there. When was it built? I have no idea. Probably after 1820, maybe even after 1830, but a real rarity, especially in that kind of configuration. This is the Daniel Knabb stone standard barn. Again, we see the symmetrical roof line of this barn type, built in 1832. Only 3 years after the 1829 Knabb barn, which was the earliest so far that we've found. This is, I would guess, pretty much, well, maybe the de Benneville barn was an English Lake District barn. I haven't been in it. I've gone by it a number of times. But this is the Donald Shelley barn. I don't know how many of you knew Donald Shelley, but he had that wonderful homestead on Covered Bridge Road. And here we have the stable wall doors. It's not really even a stable wall. The difference between this barn and all the standard barns that you'll probably almost ever see is that stone ascended from the ground level all the way up to the eaves level. Okay? Whether this door is original or not, I have no idea. It looks pretty darn old when you're on the inside of the barn, but so it's not a standard barn. These barns came from basically the northwest section of England in the Lake District. And okay, well, this is more or less the Hexheim part of the talk tonight. This is again going back to the Bertollet barn, and this is an original granary door, an 18th century granary door. What is that? 235 years old, and a heart is carved onto the door that faces the wagon floor or wagon bay. Okay. There's a fellow in France. There's a fellow in France who did his PhD thesis. He's done a number of studies, including heraldry. But this is a study that he's done for a number of years on the meaning and all the whys and wherefores of hearts. Hearts appear in many areas on buildings, I would guess especially barns, I can't say for certain, in Europe. And they appear here quite often in barns in southeast Pennsylvania. This is the, again, this is the Bertollet Schweitzer. It's all kinds of bars. We see circles and overlapping circles. We see all kinds of things here where kids or young adults or full adults, were they doodling or what were they doing? We have no idea. But again, this appears in buildings in Europe. So this is not unique. Were they just trying their trade out? I have no idea. There is a name right here. You can see it's Bertollet, and I don't know if there's a date there. I can't really see that. But in any event, those original Mousestead walls have all kinds of carvings. They have circles. They have many things. It's a real wonder. This is a frame standard barn. Now we're getting a little bit later, probably after about 1860 or so, probably after the Civil War. And we have 5-point stars here on the front wall of this barn. And here we see a close-up of the 5-point star. Okay. I don't think the 5-point star showed very frequently in the 19th century at all. I think it probably came in after about 1900, 1910. I do know that there was a star carved on a stone with a date on a house, I believe it was. I only ever saw it once in the 1850s. So stars did appear in some capacity or other, but not normally on barns, if they looked original at all. This is a Milton Hill-like star within a circular recess, okay? So here we have a few Schweitzers that have circular recesses. Can we have the lights in about, no, not quite yet, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. I'm not sure when exactly. In any event, so we have a standard barn with stone to the peak construction. And we have actually, this is a 4-foot diameter wooden plaque. I don't know what's up there exactly. Of course, I was on the ground, so I really didn't know. But in any event, this is set into a circular recess. There's a recess in the stone that probably goes into the stone by about 2.5 inches. That 1805 barn that I showed you before doesn't have today a circular recess, but it did have one, and the owner there told me that it was there once and it disappeared, meaning it was covered up maybe about 30 years or so ago. But this is a Milton Hill-like, I'm assuming that a number of you know that Milton Hill was from south of Lenhartsville in Berks County. And you have all these overlapping forms that created. Milton Hill was something of a genius, and we can't deny that. He plied his trade from about 1905, 1910 maybe, to about 1960 or so, for 50, 55 years, something on that order. And some of you have probably seen his book that came out within the last year or so. And here we see this medallion on a house. And you have these blocks at the cardinal points with the date of 1805. This is our latest finding of a circular recess. This is just north of the village of Oley. And there it is. A lot of these circular recesses had this white border around it. The white border might have been 5 or 6 or 7 inches across, and it went all the way around. Okay, no boards in here. I found original boards that must have been original boards, in my estimation, in about 6 or 7 barns. Now we see a ghost. Can everybody make that out? Maybe some of you can. But anyway, there was a barn star on that front wall, and then it was painted over. Who knows, after it was made, the original one was made, maybe 50 to 75 or more years. And here we have a barn, another barn, a nab barn, I believe. And we have now some of the more traditional 19th century, even early 19th century barn stars or hex signs. I prefer the word barn star, preferably. Barn stars on the outside of the barn and hex signs on the inside of the barn. And we'll get to that in a little bit. All right, here we have 8-point stars with articulating crosses and a pinwheel. In the middle, they're wide diameter pinwheels and narrow diameter pinwheels. I guess you'd call that one pretty much a narrow diameter. I'm sorry. Forgetting. Okay, this is a barn in Alsace, I believe. And this is kind of a variant expression of this is a stone to the standard barn. And any barn that has barn stars on the front wall that are in 2 levels is extremely rare. So here we have 3 on one level, 2 rosettes, and I would guess a 12-point star, and then a partial row or level tier on with one here on the left-hand side. Okay? Whoops. Come on. Be nice. This is the end wall. Stone is just another circular recess, several feet below the several feet below the roof peak. And again, a pinwheel in the middle, 8 stars. And wouldn't it be wonderful if that barn star, the original wood, had survived? Wouldn't that be wonderful just to see that? Can we get the lights, please? Tom? Where are you? I tricked you. There it is. Now, if this doesn't portray originality, I have no idea what would. We have 1 point, 1, 2, 3. Well, there should be 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Tom, why don't you just rotate it? Yeah, like that. Okay. The reason why we don't know, like that. So we see the stars. You can still see the move back. I'm paying him well. Don't worry. You don't really see a star. You don't really see a point here or a point up there. Why is that? Anybody? Who said that? She cheated. Yes, the rain comes down basically vertically. It can come at an angle, but basically it comes down vertically. And that's why it disappeared in essence. And it's a beautiful illustration of it. Here we have rosettes. That's probably the best rosette still in existence. Are you killing yourself? Good. Anyway. This is the most complete architectural recess, wood inset, that I know of. And we found, I keep forgetting last year. I'm not sure.
Last year.
What it was. But where? The young man whose barn this is, he had the insight. And I love this man for doing this. He just said, well, we're not going to throw it in the corner or do anything. He created this plywood backing to this thing, and he preserved it. And that is rare, rare, rare. Did it come from Oley? It came from the Oley Valley. Well, Alsace. Sure. So Tom will carry it toward the back. And we're going to show you another article. I don't know. This right here is what you see on this. Much more faded out. This is an original date board with the name. I'm going to put this down so you can just see this. What names and words are on that? 1848.
What is it? Susanna. Anton, Susanna. The German lady said that. That looks like a Susanna. Somebody said it was a left, it's like that.
But that's
all.
Oh, that's all. Where's the last name? There's no last name. Okay. That was fast. Oh, okay. All right. So your family name. Yeah. Sure. All right. So Anton and Suzanne. Okay. August 1848. This is a rarity too. A real rarity, but not as rare as that. Okay. So I'm going to put this here.
Well, that was just a copy of the other one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
It's the same line.
So that's a real rarity. This is on the opposite side of the architectural recess that Tom is showing everybody. Okay? So this is a real treat. These are what you call museum pieces. I'd like to just hand this back to people. Well, not. We still have some more. Okay. Can you get the lights, please? Okay, so we still have some more slides, not too many. You just saw that. So that's a real honey of a thing. And where are we? Okay, the Robinson Family Standard Barn. Anyway, you see this rosette. Can everybody make that out? Again, this is the Moustead wall. This is the Moustead wall. That separates the mow from the wagon bay from the mow, or the farm crop storage area. And this is the Hendrickson Barn. This is in Alsace again. The original barn, well, not even the original barn, because the original barn was probably built long before 1783. But the second generation barn was 1783, and then whatever happened to it, it was rebuilt 1914. This barn is about just about 100 feet long, but it is 70 feet wide. I have never seen or heard or known of a barn that was 70 feet wide. I've heard of a few barns that approach 60, several of them 50 feet wide in Lancaster County, but never 70. I mean, it's just like a cathedral when you walk into the structure. And there it is. So the barn is so big, and the roof structure needs to be so prominent that it actually has two supports here. That's one purlin plate, the purlin plate that goes down the entire length of the barn, and an upper. So this is the lower purlin plate system and the upper purlin plate system. That is how big. I've only ever seen, I think, 2, maybe 3 other barns in all of southeast Pennsylvania that has that. This is right in Oley. This is a outhouse, of course, and this is a fallen down tulip. Look at that. It looks like a hole in the outhouse. It's not. It's a decoration, some kind of a decoration or something. But this is the close-up of it, right there. See?
That's pretty.
And this part right here fell out, apparently. It was like that. And now here we have a stone to eaves level mill. We're just about at the end. Now, again, we see this important point of having stone to the peak or stone to the eaves level. Here we have a mill that has stone to the eaves level. And that, I'm assuming, is the original date board. Griesemer, 1847. And with a couple rosettes at the bottom and tulips over here. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. So I guess we can do a few questions and answers.
What were the slips for and the stones?
Ventilation. Ventilation. Anybody who is not signed up for the Barn News and Events newsletter, please do so before we leave. Yes, sir.
Any thoughts on how they went about engineering all those beams, anticipating how much weight would be in there?
Everybody hear that question? How did they anticipate all the weight that went into the beams of the framing units that went up? I mean, you know, they had pipe poles and they'd have maybe 10, 12, 15 men lined up. And they would have these thick sticks, in effect, with these iron spikes at the end of it, and they would just lift it up. I mean,
No, what I mean is,
What?
is how big to make the logs or the structures for the weight,
The engineering of
the engineering of it.
I don't think they actually thought too much of engineering per se, all that much. They knew how big the timbers needed to be. You know, maybe an 8x8 or an 8x10 or something like that, with braces much smaller, with posts even bigger. Maybe they were like 8x12s or something like that. But I don't think, you see, this is the idea that, I'm not saying they didn't have well thought out plans at all. I'm just saying that they were taught by their parents and grandparents and going back all that. And that is vernacular architecture. It wasn't designed. It wasn't designed per se. It wasn't treated with an architect's mind. It was just how they did things.
Trial and error.
It was a trial. It was. That's good. A trial and error kind of arrangement. Yes, that's right.
Because obviously they all understood the load and they're all so standard.
Yes, that's right. Sometimes they failed. If you had a knot and it may have weakened a timber somewhere, or they did certain kinds of things that could rip apart, and that's happened a number of times that I saw. But generally, that's not the case. Okay. Yes, back there.
Did the English barns ever have hex signs?
Yes, they did. They had hex signs, but on the inside of the barn was a barn, a particular kind of barn in Delaware County that was really heavily settled by the English. And I know of rosettes that are scribed into the Mousestead wall. So yes, they did. But, you know, we're living in 2021, even though we have these thousands of barns left. If somebody spent 100 lifetimes studying these things and everything, it'll only ever be a partial story because we've lost. Remember, I put up my finger for the number of barns left in Lehigh County from the 1700s. So that's what we have. It'll only be a partial story. We don't know. What was the demographics of barn stars in barns of the 1730s, and 1740s, and 1750s? We don't even have a barn to really know about. So how can we know the demographics of any of that stuff? We just don't know that.
So what wards off evil?
I'm sorry?
What wards off evil? Is that why they have the stars?
Well, that's
I thought
one.
this was like history as well.
Yeah. The question is, what wards off evil? Well, on the outside of the barn, you know, I think there could have been a double function. It could have warded away evil, but it was fundamentally probably embellishment or just decoration. But on the inside, very different, in my opinion. Yeah. Somebody else had a question? Yes, sir.
Why are barns red?
Why are barns red?
I heard something, because it was plentiful, red paint.
Well, yeah, iron oxide is cheap.
Okay.
You know, and what happens in very snowy areas, you have white snow. And how do you know where the barn is? You may even lose sight of the barn. This is just my speculating. It may not be accurate. And it could, and people here in the United States and in England believe that red actually was a deterrent for evil. The devil. Yeah, that's one thing. I don't think you're going to have it green. I don't think you're going to have it other. You know, red is a good color. I don't think you're going to have it orange or pink. I'm sorry? Yeah? That's because the Amish are pure. Well, maybe. There could be. Well, I think the Amish did, you know, they were the plain folk. They didn't want to, you know, get real fancy. Right? They didn't want lightning striking down and strike it. You are not to do this, you're to make it plain, right? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
At one of the presentations that we had here a couple of years ago.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to.
At one of the presentations we had here a couple of years ago.
Yes, ma'am.
It was about the Kaufman Farm.
Okay.
And the presenter said that the very first settlers in Oley were not dairy farmers, that they raised grain and they shipped the grain to Philly and other places. But that later on, when the roads were better, was when they started the dairy farming, because then they could get the milk to the cities and it would still be fresh. So I'm wondering, do you see a change in the barns because of that?
Yes, I do. Everybody hear that question? The question basically is, why did they go from grain farming to dairy farming?
No, that wasn't the question.
Well, why not? All right, say it again. Not the whole thing, but just the end.
No, they went to the dairy farming because the roads were better and they could get the milk
Oh,
to the
yeah.
destination.
Well,
My question was about the barns. Did they change the types of barns they were building?
Yeah, that's right. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, the Industrial Revolution came in the 1810 to 1830 time frame, and they had to compete with the Midwestern people in Ohio, maybe a little bit later, Illinois, Western, Pennsylvania. So they had to do these things to earn money. Competition exists all over the place, all the time. All right? The Schweitzer barn, the earlier Schweitzer barn, was almost medieval-like. And even though some of the barns in Lancaster County were over 100 feet long, it was still an outmoded form. That's why you see very little after about 1830 or 40. Okay, the standard barn was way, way, way more successful. And it lent itself more to dairy farming. Dairy. Is that okay? Pretty much.
Part was especially one on the road, but the railroad played a big part of it.
The railroads did, the canals did. All these things were happening after 1810, 1820. It was a different world. We had so many. Transportation was paramount, and that's what we have to think about. Any kind of thing that would change the farm economy will basically change, at least on some level, the construction of a barn. Yes, sir.
How early can we date and document the earliest barn starts?
Okay. Actually, the Yoder. Well, again, we have to differentiate between the exterior and the interior. Okay. We don't know too much about the interior. The Bertlick barn, 1780s, has all kinds of stuff in there. That's one of the best ones. The Casper Ball Stone Ground Barn, which I don't have here tonight, that's 1791. That's 230 years old. That has a bunch of stuff in there. Okay, but on the exterior, apparently, pardon me, the earliest that we know of is probably the Yoder Farm in Oley, right off of Covered Bridge Road. And that has a circular recess where almost unquestionably there was a barn star within that. The original wood fell out, but at the top of it, scratched in the mortar, is 1795. And that's the only almost surefire date that I know of for a barn star there. Again, this goes back to the attrition thing. We've had so much elimination of so many barns that, we just don't know. If we were around in great-grandfather's day, we would be able to understand and know and record all kinds of things that we can't today. Or it would be impossible to do in the last 30 or 40 years. Yes?
I heard that mail counts used to paint your barn if they could put their name on it. Is that true? There was one up around Moravian that I remember. That's about the last one I remember seeing.
Yeah, there's one or two up in northern Lehigh County. They're black paint and it lasts forever. Yeah, like Burma Shave, you probably heard of Burma Shave too, right? And then they put their placards out, and they wanted to, that same kind of thing was happening, where if you let me do that, I'll do this for you, kind of thing, yeah.
So they did do that.
Well, I think so. In general, yeah, but I can't prove it. I don't know when it first came in. He's talking about the male pouch tobacco. Treat yourself as the best.
And you almost don't see that all. I mean, there's more than one.
Well, barns have disappeared. I mean, I've been in many areas where some old timers say, there were so many barns left here, and now we have hardly any. But still, in Lehigh County, we have almost 1,700 barns. Who would have thought of that?
And over 3,000 in Berks County?
Probably. I would, in general, I mean, there's 14 townships in all of Lehigh County, and there's 62 in Berks County. So figure it out. There must be over 3,000, maybe even 4,000. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
In our barn, and a lot of barns, if you see the pictures, they have right above where the mow is, ladders that go up, and it just, as they say in the Dutch, it gaat niks verwonderd. How did they get hay piled that high before the days of mechanical balers and hay trolleys? Hay trolley system. So how did they get that high?
Everybody hear that? How did they fill up the mow with the hay? Well, first of all, they would come in with their loaded hay wagons, and they'd be on the top of the hay, and they could fork them over. We don't really know how they did that exactly. I mean, I have had a few old timers give me certain clues about how they filled up hay mows and everything. And don't forget, there's a mow above the wagon floor, even about 12 feet above that. It's called the overden, above the den, above the threshing floor. So we don't know. I mean, I've contended myself with this same situation with Dutch American barns in New York State, New Jersey, and that's what I've studied for a very long time. So, it's just hard to know. When people of 125 years ago could have just interviewed a lot of people from the 1830s and 40s and 50s, we would have known all those kinds of things, but they didn't. I do know that they separated farm crops one area to the other. There's many things. When I came here, and his name will remain anonymous, I met a geographer about 120 miles from my home in the country. And we were talking about things, and he knew I was a barn person, and he said, barns have been overstudied. This is a geographer of long standing, and I mean, he wasn't a barn historian by any means, but that's what he said, and we know so little about barns. I mean, I could write 15 books on barns, and still we would know very little. You can only do so much, of course. Yes?
To answer one of the questions about how to get the hay up that high, in our barn, above the threshing floor, there's another, I forget what we call it, but it's down about 6 or 8 feet below the top beam. My dad, when he first started farming.
When was that?
Back in the 1920s.
Okay, his father started farming in the 1920s, yeah.
They would take the hay wagon in and fill one hay mow, and the top of the load, they would fork up on that lower one, and then fork it over. The bottom of the load went in the next hay mow and started. And that's the way they kept going. And the top of the load went to the fourth mow. Of course, they forked it this way and then across. And they put the lower in the low mow until they got that full.
What he just said is that they would load up one mow and then go to the other side and just keep building up and building up. Did you help him with that?
No.
You never did.
When I got home, they already had the hay truck. Put the hay hook in the load.
Right.
And pulled it up and put it from one mow.
Well, don't forget they didn't bale hay until about the mid to late 1940s. Okay? Before that, there was just loose farm crop. Right.
Now there's a lot more weight on these
until they develop or not, the title fails.
Yes.
It's a great place to play too.
What is that? They were trying to what? Oh, okay. Yeah. Can you spell that word for me? Later? You don't have to do it, you can't spell it? Please? I beg you. Yeah? And where are you from? Where did that take place? Adamstown? Yeah. In Chester County? Oh, Lebanon, okay. Yeah, every once in a while you hear these old stories of the great. Obviously becoming more and more rare. Anybody else?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
When it comes to preservation, I know that in southern Lancaster, the Amish have knocked down a lot of old barns and
Yeah.
covered up other ones.
Yeah.
Lehigh, you have housing developments going in, knocking everything down.
Right.
What can we do to preserve what's left?
What can we preserve? What can we do to preserve barns from falling down? Well, you can devote your life like I have for 45 years and recording them. I mean, you know, none of us has Bill Gates money. If we combine everybody here, we probably have a tenth of 1% of what Bill Gates money is, and he's not helping me at all. You know, you can just, I think that the biggest thing that you can do is if you see a barn that's being taken down, or you think it's being threatened, or it's even partially falling down, if you're any kind of a photographer, take pictures of it. And what county, are you from Berks County?
Yeah.
You know, do that, and then submit it to the County Historical Society. And maybe write up a little story on it. I mean, that's all we can do.
Is your question more about what can be done collectively to save barns?
In any way, either as a community or individually?
I would just, you know, start, really, I mean, if you want to do that, start to get a name for yourself and write an article and, you know, look at, you know, several barns that are coming down and write an article and put it in the Reading Eagle or something like that. And that's how interest gets generated. You know, I mean, yeah, it's a shame, but it's been going on for a very, very long time. This is why I do these talks, to generate interest and for people to appreciate what we have. I mean, this is our heritage. You know, Eric Sloan wrote the very first book on barns in North America in 1954. Think about that, 1954. That was after I was born, you know? And there was hardly any interest in it. You know, barns are barns, they just, you know, they're there and who cares or something. But they all have their individual personalities. You know, everything that you see in a barn, no matter what it is, it could be a cut stone, a cut timber, a board, a this or a that. It was there the way, it's there the way it is because of a decision that somebody made. Do you care about those decisions? You want to find patterns? And in patterns, you find meaningfulness. Okay? So, I mean, it's up to, as an individual, it's just, you know, you have to be a leader of some kind and just do what you can. But I think you can start out by just, if you know of 3 or 4 barns that are falling down, at least something would be preserved with that. I gave a talk, like I said before, on Saturday, and I hightailed it, this is 2 years ago, from Macungie all the way down to Cape May County. And Jack Sayer was a guy who was 97. And he told me just a tiny thing. He didn't have an old, well, it was a farm at one point, but he didn't have a real old house. But he told me that on his property on Seashore Road, north of Cape May Borough, that his barn that came down around 1960, give or take, had hewn beams in them. And I had my notebook out there, and I recorded this. Just a simple little thing like that. Did it tell us how big it was?
Was it an English barn? Was it this? Was it that? But at least that tiny little bit of information is preserved. So, you know, that's what we have. And that's all we can do. You know, I mean, if you want to corral 10 or 20 people together, you can. But you could, in the beginning at least, you can do a lot more by yourself. And then as things go on. I mean, it took me about 7 years, when I first came here in 2000, it took me about 7 years for people to finally know that I was involved in barns. And then, of course, it increased and increased and increased. And, you know, that's what we have.
What about the bank barns?
What about it?
I don't know, they're like pretty popular, and one today,
The what?
they're pretty popular.
Yeah.
Right? I bet, I'd say about half of them are bank barns, aren't they?
Oh, more than that.
And, I mean, were they early?
The earliest standard barn that we know is 1792, and that's in Devon, in Chester County.
Does a bank barn